The gunshot echoed across the vast Montana prairie as Bethany Blackburn crouched behind the overturned wagon, her hands trembling as she reloaded her father's old Winchester rifle. The year was 1876, and at 22, she'd never imagined she'd be fighting for her life against the very men her late husband had once called friends. "Come on out, Bethany," hollered Jasper Wilkes, his voice carrying over the whistling wind. "Nobody needs to die today. Just hand over the deed, and we'll be on our way." Blood trickled down her temple where a bullet had grazed her moments earlier. The deed to her land, the only thing left of value after her husband's gambling debts had nearly ruined her, was tucked safely in her boot. Thomas had been dead 6 months now, shot in the back by someone he'd owed money to, leaving Bethany with nothing but debt and a small parcel of land that had unexpectedly become valuable when rumors of gold spread through the territory. "You'll have to kill me first," she shouted back, wincing at the pain in her ribs where she'd been kicked during the initial struggle. "That can be arranged," another voice called out Fletcher, one of Thomas's drinking companions. Bethany closed her eyes briefly, calculating her dwindling options. 3 against 1, limited ammunition, and at least 10 miles from the nearest town. Her chances were looking slimmer by the moment. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made her heart sink further. More of Wilkes's men, no doubt. But as the rhythm of the approaching horse grew louder, she realized it was just one rider, coming fast. "What in tarnation is going on here?" a deep voice bellowed. Bethany risked a glance over the wagon's edge. A tall man had dismounted from a magnificent black stallion, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. What caught her attention was the star pinned to his leather vest, a sheriff's badge. "This ain't your jurisdiction, lawman," Wilkes spat. "This is private business." 3 men against 1 woman looks mighty suspicious for private business, the stranger replied, his hand hovering near his holster. "I suggest you boys find somewhere else to be." Wilkes laughed. "Do you know who I am? My brother owns half the territory. And I'm Samuel Kincaid, acting U.S. Marshal for this district while Sheriff Davis recovers from his injuries," the man replied calmly. "So, unless you want to explain to a federal judge why you're threatening a widow on her own property, I suggest you mount up and ride." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as neither side moved. Bethany held her breath, fingers still on the trigger of her rifle. Finally, Wilkes made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "This ain't over, Bethany. That land will be mine one way or another." As the 3 men reluctantly retreated, mounting their horses and galloping away, Bethany felt her legs give out beneath her. The rifle clattered to the ground as she sank down, her back against the wagon wheel. The marshal approached cautiously, holstering his weapon. Now that she could see him clearly, Bethany noticed his striking features weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes that contrasted with his tanned skin. A faded scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the stubble of his beard. "Madam, are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Nothing that won't heal," she replied, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. "Thank you, Marshal Kincaid." "Sam," he corrected, offering a canteen. "Here, drink some water." As Bethany took a grateful sip, she noticed him assessing the overturned wagon, the scattered supplies, and the lone horse still tethered nearby. His gaze returned to her face, lingering on the blood trickling down her cheek. "Let me help you with that," he said, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket. As he gently dabbed at the wound, Bethany winced. "Sorry," he murmured. "Looks like the bullet just grazed you. You're lucky." "Lucky isn't a word I'd use to describe my situation," she replied bitterly. "Care to tell me what 3 men were willing to kill you for?" Sam asked, helping her to her feet. Bethany hesitated, years of learned caution making her wary of strangers, even those with badges. "My land, there's talk of gold, though I haven't seen evidence of it myself. My husband died owing those men money, and now they think taking my property will settle the debt." Sam's expression darkened. "Your husband was Thomas Blackburn? You knew him?" Bethany asked, surprised. "Only by reputation," Sam replied, his tone guarded. "I've been tracking those men for other reasons. They're suspected of rustling cattle from the reservation and selling stolen horses across the territory." He helped Bethany right the wagon, gathering the scattered supplies. "Where were you headed when they ambushed you?" "Silver Creek," she replied, referring to the growing settlement about 20 miles northeast. I need supplies, and I was hoping to find work. Can't survive on that land much longer without income. Sam nodded, seemingly making a decision. I'll escort you there. Those men might return, and you shouldn't be traveling alone. I've managed on my own since Thomas died, Bethany said stiffly, her pride stinging. I'm sure you have, Sam replied with a hint of admiration in his voice. But even the most capable people can use help sometimes. As they repacked the wagon and prepared to continue the journey, Bethany couldn't help but study the marshal from the corner of her eye. Unlike most men she'd encountered in the territory, he treated her with respect rather than pity or condescension. There was something else about him, a quietness, a shadow behind his eyes that suggested he carried his own burdens. Have you been a marshal long? She asked as they traveled, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon filling the silence between them. 5 years, Sam replied, riding alongside her. Before that, I was a scout for the army. And before that, Bethany pressed, curious about the man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Curious, aren't you, Mrs. Blackburn? Bethany, she corrected. And yes, it's not every day a U.S. Marshal appears out of nowhere when I need one. I wasn't just passing by, Sam admitted. I've been tracking Wilkes and his men for weeks. They're connected to a larger operation stealing horses, rustling cattle, and terrorizing smaller homesteads. Including mine, Bethany said. Sam nodded. Your husband's association with them put your property on their map. When I heard they were headed this way, I followed. The confession that he'd been essentially using her as bait should have angered Bethany, but instead, she found herself grateful for his honesty. As they crested a hill, the sprawling plains stretched before them, painted golden by the setting sun. In the distance, a herd of wild horses galloped freely, their manes flying in the wind. We should make camp soon, Sam suggested. There's a creek about a mile ahead with good shelter. Bethany agreed, feeling the exhaustion of the day's events settling into her bones. The cut on her temple had stopped bleeding, but her body ached from the altercation. At the creek, they worked together in comfortable silence, Sam tending to the horses while Bethany prepared a simple meal from her provisions. As darkness fell, the campfire cast dancing shadows across their faces. You're good at that, Sam remarked, watching as Bethany expertly crafted biscuits in a small cast-iron skillet balanced on hot coals. My mother taught me, she replied. She said a woman who can make biscuits without a proper kitchen can survive anything. Wise woman, Sam commented, accepting a tin plate from her. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and Bethany felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. As they ate, Sam shared stories of his travels across the territories, tales of magnificent landscapes, strange characters, and occasional moments of danger. Bethany found herself laughing for the first time in months, the weight of her troubles temporarily lifted by his company. And you? He asked eventually. How did you end up alone on a homestead in Montana Territory? Bethany's smile faded. Thomas had dreams. He saw opportunity in the West that he couldn't find back east. I believed in him, in us. She stared into the flames. But the West changes people. Thomas found cards and whiskey more compelling than farming. By the time I realized how bad things had gotten, we were in too deep. Yet you stayed, Sam observed. Where would I go? She asked simply. Back east to a family that disowned me for marrying beneath my station? To relatives who warned me Thomas would never amount to anything. The land is mine now. It's all I have left. Sam's eyes reflected the firelight as he studied her. You're a strong woman, Bethany Blackburn. I'm a survivor, she corrected. There's a difference. That night, as she lay wrapped in her blanket near the fire, Bethany found herself watching Sam as he kept the first watch. His profile against the starry sky was strong, resolute. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt safe. The next morning, they continued their journey toward Silver Creek. The landscape gradually shifted from open prairie to rolling hills dotted with pine trees. By midday, they could see smoke from chimneys rising in the distance. We'll be there before sundown, Sam said, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. Bethany nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. Her previous visits to town had been uncomfortable at best. As Thomas Blackburn's widow, she was either an object of pity or suspicion, depending on who was owed money. Marshal, she began hesitantly. "I should warn you that my reception in town might be complicated. Thomas left behind debts and bad feelings." "I'm familiar with complicated receptions," Sam replied with a wry smile. "And it's Sam, remember?" As they approached the outskirts of town, the wagon wheel suddenly caught in a deep rut, cracking ominously. Sam helped Bethany down to inspect the damage. "Broken clean through," he announced, kneeling beside the wheel. "We won't get far on this." Bethany pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting tears of frustration. "Perfect. Just perfect." "There's a blacksmith in town who can fix it," Sam offered. "We'll have to leave the wagon here and ride in." The prospect of riding double with Sam sent an unexpected flutter through Bethany's chest. "I can walk," she suggested weakly. Sam's eyebrow rose. 4 miles in those boots? I've seen the blisters they've given you already." Before she could protest further, he was securing her belongings, tying her horse to the back of the wagon, and offering his hand to help her mount his stallion. "Hold tight," he instructed as he swung up behind her. The closeness was both comforting and unsettling. Sam's chest pressed against her back, his arms encircling her as he held the reins. Bethany couldn't remember the last time she'd been this close to another person. Thomas had grown distant long before his death, seeking comfort in bottles rather than his wife's arms. Silver Creek had grown since Bethany's last visit. New buildings lined the main street, and the population seemed to have doubled. As they rode in, she felt eyes turning their way. A woman arriving on a horse with the marshal was bound to start gossip. "We'll see to the wheel first," Sam decided, guiding his horse toward the blacksmith's shop at the edge of town. The blacksmith, a burly man named Fergus, examined the damaged wheel and promised to have it repaired by the following afternoon. "You'll be needing a place to stay then," he remarked, glancing between Bethany and Sam with undisguised curiosity. "Is Mrs. Peterson still running the boarding house?" Bethany asked, deliberately ignoring his insinuation. "Aye, though it's mostly full with miners these days," Fergus replied. "Gold fever's brought all sorts through town lately." After arranging for the wheel repair, Sam led Bethany toward the center of town. "I need to check in with the local sheriff," he explained. "Then we'll find you accommodations." The sheriff's office was a small wooden building next to the jail. Inside, Sheriff Miller, a graying man with a perpetual scowl, looked up from his desk with surprise. "Kincaid? Didn't expect to see you in these parts." "Following a lead on the Wilkes gang," Sam replied, shaking the man's hand. "They ambushed Mrs. Blackburn here on the road from her homestead." Sheriff Miller's gaze shifted to Bethany, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Thomas Blackburn's widow, eh? Heard about your troubles. Sorry for your loss, madam." Bethany nodded stiffly, accustomed to the hollow condolences. "Any word on their movements in this area?" Sam asked, steering the conversation back to the matter at hand. As the men discussed the criminal activities in the region, Bethany's attention wandered to the wanted posters tacked to the wall. Her blood froze when she spotted a familiar face among them. Her late husband's younger brother, Michael Blackburn, wanted for mail theft and horse stealing in Wyoming territory. She hadn't seen Michael in over a year, not since he'd visited their homestead and gotten into a vicious argument with Thomas over money. The brothers had nearly killed each other before Michael rode off, swearing revenge. 2 months later, Thomas was shot in the back by an unknown assailant while returning from town. Bethany had always suspected, but seeing the poster confirmed her worst fears. Her brother-in-law was a wanted criminal, possibly her husband's murderer, and connected to the very gang threatening her land. "Bethany?" Sam's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right? You look pale." She tore her gaze from the poster. "Just tired," she lied. "It's been a long day." Sheriff Miller directed them to the hotel, as the boarding house was indeed full. "Only got one room available, though," he added, with a meaningful look between them. "We'll manage," Sam replied smoothly, ignoring the implication. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the dusty street. Bethany felt overwhelmed by the revelations and the curious stares of townspeople. "I need a moment," she murmured to Sam, stepping into the shade of the general store's awning. "Take your time," he said gently. "I'll secure our room and check on supplies." Alone for the first time since the ambush, Bethany leaned against the wooden building, trying to collect her thoughts. Michael Blackburn wanted outlaw, possibly working with Wilkes. It was too much coincidence to ignore. If he was involved with the gang targeting her land, her situation was more dangerous than she'd realized. "Well, look who's come crawling back to town," a sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. Bethany straightened to face Loretta Wilson, the banker's wife and Silver Creek's self-appointed moral authority. The older woman's pinched face radiated disapproval. "Mrs. Wilson," Bethany acknowledged coolly. "Arriving on the same horse as that marshal I see," Loretta continued. "Your poor mother would be scandalized if she knew how quickly you've forgotten your mourning." Bethany felt heat rising to her cheeks. But years of enduring Thomas's public embarrassments had taught her restraint. "The marshal saved me from being robbed and possibly killed. My wagon wheel broke outside of town. If you'll excuse me." She attempted to step around the woman, but Loretta wasn't finished. "Your husband left quite a mess behind, Mrs. Blackburn. Many in town haven't forgotten the debts or the promises broken. And now you show up with a new protector? Some might call that calculated." "And some might mind their own business," came Sam's voice as he approached, his expression polite but his eyes hard. "Mrs. Blackburn has been through an ordeal, Mrs. Wilson," Loretta replied, her demeanor shifting instantly at the sight of his badge. "Loretta Wilson. My husband runs the bank." "Well, Mrs. Wilson, I'm sure a woman of your standing understands the importance of Christian charity," Sam said smoothly. "Mrs. Blackburn was attacked on the road to town. I'd hate to think what might have happened without intervention." Loretta's mouth opened and closed before she mumbled something about being expected elsewhere and hurried away. "I see what you mean about complicated receptions," Sam remarked dryly. "That's just the beginning," Bethany sighed. "Thomas had a talent for making enemies." "So I've gathered," Sam replied, offering his arm. "Come on, I've secured a room at the hotel, and you look like you could use some rest." The hotel was the grandest building in Silver Creek, though that wasn't saying much. The lobby featured worn but clean furnishings, and the clerk handed Sam a key with a knowing smile that made Bethany want to disappear into the floorboards. "I've explained our situation," Sam assured her as they climbed the stairs. "Your reputation is intact." The room was simple: a bed, a washstand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the main street. Bethany stood awkwardly in the center, acutely aware of the intimate setting. "I'll take the floor," Sam said immediately, reading her discomfort. "I've slept on worse." "You don't have to," Bethany began, then stopped herself. "Thank you. I need to meet with some contacts in town," Sam explained, placing her bag on the bed. "Will you be all right here for a few hours?" Bethany nodded, relief and disappointment mingling strangely in her chest. "I should rest anyway. It's been quite a day." After Sam left, Bethany sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to fall. The discovery about Michael, the attack, the gossip in town, it was all catching up with her at once. She cried silently, years of practice making her grief almost invisible. When she'd composed herself, Bethany used the basin to wash away the dust of travel and the dried blood from her temple. The cut was healing cleanly, though it would likely leave a small scar, one more mark to remind her of the life she'd chosen. She changed into her spare dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been her Sunday best, but was now reserved for town visits. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, Bethany barely recognized herself. Her once rosy cheeks were hollow, her auburn hair dulled by months of hard work and worry. At 22, she looked years older. "They say I'm damaged," she whispered to her reflection, remembering the whispers that had followed her through town. Damaged goods, the pretty Eastern girl who'd thrown away her future on a charming wastrel, only to be left a widow with nothing but debts and a failing homestead. A knock at the door startled her. "Bethany, it's Sam." She opened the door to find him holding a tray with 2 covered plates. "I thought you might be hungry," he explained, stepping inside. The hotel restaurant is quite good. The simple act of kindness bringing her dinner, rather than expecting her to brave the gossip downstairs, touched Bethany deeply. "Thank you," she said, genuinely moved. They ate at the small table by the window, watching as the town's activity slowed with the setting sun. Sam shared what he'd learned Wilkes and his men had been in town 3 days earlier, asking questions about Bethany and her land. "They believe there's gold on your property," Sam explained. A prospector passed through last month, claiming he'd found color in the creek that runs through your land. Bethany shook her head in disbelief. That's what this is about? Some stranger's claim about gold? I've lived there for 2 years and never seen a speck. Gold fever makes men lose their minds, Sam replied, refilling her coffee cup. And Wilkes isn't the type to take chances. If there's even a rumor of gold, he wants control. Hesitantly, Bethany revealed what she'd seen at the sheriff's office. There's something else. The wanted poster for Michael Blackburn, he's Thomas's younger brother. We didn't part on good terms. I've always suspected he might have been involved in Thomas's death. Sam's expression grew serious. That's a significant connection. Was Michael ever associated with Wilkes? I don't know, Bethany admitted, but it seems too coincidental that his brother's former associates are now trying to take my land, especially if Michael is running with outlaws. As night fell, Bethany couldn't help but notice how the room seemed to shrink, the space between them charged with an unspoken tension. Sam kept his word, making a pallet on the floor while Bethany took the bed, but sleep eluded her as she lay listening to his steady breathing in the darkness. Sam, she whispered, are you awake? Yes, came his immediate response. Why did you really help me? Bethany asked, the question that had been nagging at her finally finding voice in the safety of darkness. You said you were tracking Wilkes, but you could have just observed the ambush, gathered intelligence. Instead, you intervened. The silence stretched so long that Bethany thought he might not answer. I watched my sister die because I didn't intervene quickly enough, Sam finally said, his voice tight with old pain. She married a man who turned cruel after the war. By the time I realized how bad things had gotten, it was too late. I found her beaten to death in their cabin while he was in town drinking. Bethany's heart clenched. I'm so sorry. When I saw you standing your ground against those men, I saw someone worth saving, Sam continued. Someone fighting for what was hers against impossible odds. I couldn't ride away from that. The raw honesty in his voice moved something deep within Bethany. Without thinking, she reached her hand down toward his palate. In the darkness, his fingers found hers, rough and warm. Thank you for telling me, she whispered. Their hands remained connected for a long moment before Bethany reluctantly withdrew hers, turning on her side. For the first time in months, she fell into a dreamless sleep. Free from the nightmares that usually plagued her, morning brought a changed atmosphere between them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. They breakfasted together in companionable silence before heading to check on the wagon wheel. Fergus had made good progress, but needed a few more hours to complete the repair. Should be ready by noon, he promised, wiping greasy hands on his apron. With time to spare, Sam suggested Bethany purchase the supplies she'd come to town for. At the general store, the owner, Mr. Abernathy, greeted her with surprising warmth. Mrs. Blackburn, good to see you, he said, eyes flicking curiously to Sam. Heard you had some trouble on the road. News travels fast, Bethany remarked, handing him her modest list of essentials. Small town, Abernathy replied with a shrug. Marshal, you new to these parts? While Sam engaged the storekeeper in conversation, Bethany browsed the shelves, calculating how to stretch her meager funds. A bolt of blue gingham caught her eye, the exact shade her mother had always favored for summer dresses. For a moment, Bethany allowed herself to imagine having something new, something pretty, before regretfully turning away. Add that to our order, Sam's voice said behind her. Bethany whirled around. What? No, I wasn't. Considerate payment for cooking those biscuits last night, Sam insisted quietly. Best meal I've had in months. Before she could protest further, Abernathy was cutting 3 yards of the fabric and adding it to her purchases. Bethany felt a flush of embarrassment mixed with gratitude. You didn't have to do that, she murmured as they left the store, her packages tucked under her arm. I know, Sam replied simply, but everyone deserves something beautiful now and then. The simple statement, delivered so matter-of-factly, brought unexpected tears to Bethany's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, unused to such consideration. Their next stop was the land office, where Bethany needed to verify her deed was properly registered. The clerk, a nervous young man named Edwin, shuffled through papers at her request. Here it is, Mrs. Blackburn, 160 acres along Blackbird Creek, registered to Thomas Blackburn in 1874. transferred to Bethany Blackburn upon his death last November. "Is everything in order?" Bethany asked, noticing how the clerk's eyes darted nervously. "Yes, madam, though." Edwin hesitated, glancing toward Sam. "There was a man asking about your claim last week. Said he was your brother-in-law with a family interest in the property." Bethany's blood ran cold. "Michael Blackburn?" Edwin nodded. He had some documentation with him, a letter, supposedly from Thomas, stating the land was purchased with family money and should revert to his brother if anything happened to him. "That's a lie," Bethany stated firmly. "The land was purchased with my dowry money. Thomas never had a penny to his name." "The claim seems suspicious," Edwin assured her. "I told him the deed transfer to you was legal and binding. He wasn't happy, said he'd be back with more conclusive evidence." Sam stepped forward. "Did he mention where he was staying or where he was headed?" "Said something about meeting partners at Willow Bend," Edwin replied. "That's all I know." Outside, Bethany struggled to contain her rising panic. "Willow Bend is only 15 miles from my homestead. If Michael is working with Wilkes—" "It confirms our suspicions," Sam agreed grimly. "We need to get your wagon fixed and get you somewhere safe." "My land is all I have left," Bethany insisted. "I'm not abandoning it." Sam studied her determined expression. "Then we'll make sure you can defend it properly." They returned to the blacksmith shop to find the wheel repaired and ready. As Fergus helped reattach it to the wagon, Sam pulled Bethany aside. "I need to send a telegram to my superiors about the connection between Michael Blackburn and the Wilkes gang," he explained. "Will you be all right for a few minutes?" Bethany nodded, turning to help secure her supplies in the wagon. She was checking the harness when a familiar voice made her freeze. "Well, if it isn't my dear sister-in-law." Bethany turned slowly to face Michael Blackburn. At 30, he was younger than Thomas had been, but carried the same charming smile that had once captivated her. Now, that smile sent chills down her spine. "Michael," she acknowledged coldly, "the land office mentioned you were asking questions about my property." "Our property," he corrected, stepping closer. Bethany noticed he kept one hand near his holstered gun. "Thomas bought that land with Blackburn money. As his only living relative, it rightfully belongs to me." "That's a lie, and you know it," Bethany replied, standing her ground despite her racing heart. "The land was purchased with my dowry. You have no claim to it." Michael's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "A judge might see things differently when I explain how my poor, grief-stricken sister-in-law is confused about the arrangements my brother made before his untimely death." "You mean before you shot him in the back?" Bethany challenged, the accusation slipping out before she could stop it. Michael's expression darkened dangerously. "Careful, Bethany. Accusations like that could be hazardous to your health. I'm offering you a fair deal, sign the land over to me, and I'll give you enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Chicago, perhaps. A pretty widow like you could do well there." "I'm not signing anything," Bethany stated firmly. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You always were stubborn. Thomas complained about it often enough." His hand closed around her arm, fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Maybe we need to continue this conversation somewhere more private." "Remove your hand from the lady." Sam's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Michael turned, his grip on Bethany loosening slightly as he assessed the marshal. "This is a family matter, friend. Best move along." Sam's hand rested casually on his holster. "I'm making it my matter." "Step away from Mrs. Blackburn." For a tense moment, Bethany feared Michael might draw his weapon. Instead, he released her arm with a theatrical gesture of innocence. "No need for trouble, Marshal. Just having a conversation with my brother's widow about some unfinished business." Michael tipped his hat mockingly. "We'll continue this later, Bethany. My offer won't remain open indefinitely." As Michael sauntered away, disappearing into the saloon across the street, Bethany released a shaky breath. "Are you hurt?" Sam asked, examining her arm, where Michael's fingers had left red marks. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. But he confirmed what we suspected: he wants my land and is willing to do anything to get it. Sam's expression was grim. "I sent the telegram. We should leave town as soon as possible. Michael will likely have friends watching." Within the hour, they were on the road, Bethany driving the wagon while Sam rode alongside, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The encounter with Michael had left Bethany shaken, but more determined than ever to protect what was hers. "We should avoid the main road back to your homestead," Sam suggested as they reached a fork. "Take the northern route through Harper's Pass. It's longer, but less traveled." The alternative route took them through rugged, beautiful country rocky outcroppings, giving way to pine forests and meadows bursting with wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Bethany might have enjoyed the scenery. "Tell me about your land," Sam said as they traveled, perhaps trying to distract her from worrying about Michael. Bethany's expression softened slightly. "It's nothing special by most standards, a small cabin, a creek, good grazing land. But it's peaceful. In the spring, the meadows fill with blue lupines and orange poppies. The creek runs clear and cold, even in summer." She paused, surprised by the fondness in her own voice. "When Thomas was away, which was often toward the end, I'd sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold." "Sounds like more than just a deed to me," Sam observed quietly. "It is," Bethany admitted. "It's the only place that's ever felt like it could be home. Thomas never appreciated it. He was always looking for something bigger, better, more exciting. But I found something there I never had back east. Freedom, maybe. Space to breathe." As the afternoon wore on, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm. They pushed on, hoping to reach shelter before the rain began. "There's a line shack about 3 miles ahead," Sam informed her, pointing toward a distant ridge. "Used by cowboys during cattle drives. Should be empty this time of year." They reached the small cabin just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. It was a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk against one wall. Dust and cobwebs suggested it hadn't been used in some time. While Sam tended to the horses under a lean-to at the side of the cabin, Bethany swept the floor and started a fire in the hearth. Outside, the gentle rain had become a downpour, drumming on the roof and transforming the dirt yard into mud. "We might be here overnight," Sam announced as he entered, shaking water from his hat. "That creek ahead will be impassable if this rain continues." Bethany nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness at the prospect of another night in close quarters with Sam. She busied herself preparing a simple meal from their supplies while he checked the perimeter of the cabin, securing doors and windows. "At least we'll be comfortable," he remarked, returning to stand by the fire, more so than camping in the rain. The small cabin felt intimate as they ate by firelight, their shadows dancing on the walls. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain continued to pour. "What will you do once this is resolved?" Sam asked, breaking a companionable silence. "Will you stay on your land?" Bethany considered the question, one she'd been avoiding. "I don't know if I can make a go of it alone. The land needs work fences repaired, fields planted. I was thinking of selling once the deed was secure, maybe moving to Denver or back east." "Is that what you want?" Sam's gaze was intent, searching. "What I want," Bethany repeated softly, staring into the flames. "I'm not sure anyone has asked me that in a very long time." "I'm asking now," Sam said simply. Bethany looked up, meeting his eyes. "What I want is to not be afraid anymore, to wake up without wondering if this is the day I lose everything, to build something that's truly mine." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I want to see those wildflowers bloom next spring and know they're blooming on my land." Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we'll make sure that happens." Something shifted between them. In that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had dared name. The crackling fire and drumming rain created a world apart, a space where their shared isolation brought them closer. "May I ask you something personal?" Bethany ventured, gathering her courage. "Of course." "That scar on your jaw, how did you get it?" Sam's fingers unconsciously traced the faded line. "Apache raid, when I was scouting for the army. I was captured, held for 3 weeks before escaping. One of their warriors marked me with his knife, said it would remind me that I lived because he chose to let me live." "That must have been terrifying," Bethany murmured. "It was educational," Sam corrected. "I learned their language, came to understand their perspective. When I escaped, I took that understanding with me. Later, when I became a marshal, it helped me negotiate peace in situations where others would have started shooting." His willingness to see beyond his own experience, to learn even from his captors, impressed Bethany deeply. It spoke to a quality rare in men of the frontier: empathy. As the evening wore on, they shared more stories: Bethany of her sheltered upbringing in Pennsylvania, Sam of his travels throughout the territories. The space between them on the bench before the fire gradually diminished until their shoulders were nearly touching. When the fire burned low, the question of sleeping arrangements loomed awkwardly between them. The cabin offered only the single narrow bunk. "I'll take the floor," Sam offered, just as he had at the hotel. "Don't be ridiculous," Bethany replied, summoning her courage. "That floor is cold and hard, and you've been riding all day." "The bunk is big enough for both of us if we're careful." Sam's eyebrow rose slightly. "Are you certain?" "We're both adults," Bethany said, more confidently than she felt. "And fully clothed adults at that." A small smile played at the corner of Sam's mouth. "As the lady wishes." They arranged themselves carefully on the narrow bunk, a respectable few inches separating them as they lay back to back. Bethany was acutely aware of Sam's presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the sound of his breathing. Despite her exhaustion, sleep seemed impossible. "Sam," she whispered after several minutes of tense silence. Thank you for everything you've done." Sam was quiet for a moment. "You don't need to thank me, Bethany." "I do," she insisted, turning slightly toward him, though still not quite touching. "Not just for saving me from Wilkes, but for treating me like a person worth helping. Most men see a widow with nothing and look right through her." Sam rolled to face her, their faces now inches apart in the dim light. "I see you, Bethany Blackburn. I've seen you from the first moment, your courage, your determination, your heart. You're not someone to look through. You're someone to look at, and keep looking at, wondering how one person can contain so much strength." The sincerity in his voice, the intensity of his gaze, it undid something in Bethany, some final resistance she hadn't even realized she was holding. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. "They say I'm damaged," she whispered, finally giving voice to the fear that had haunted her since Thomas's death, that she was broken beyond repair, destined to carry her failures and losses like visible scars. Sam's hand came up to gently wipe away her tears, his touch infinitely tender. "Then let me be damaged too with you," he replied softly. "We all carry wounds, Bethany. Some are just more visible than others." The simple acceptance in his words broke through Bethany's carefully constructed walls. She found herself moving closer, seeking the comfort of human connection she'd been denied for so long. Sam's arms encircled her, strong and secure, as she pressed her face against his chest and released the grief she'd carried alone. They held each other through the night, a tangle of comfort and unspoken promises as the storm raged outside. Bethany slept deeply for the first time in months, lulled by the steady rhythm of Sam's heartbeat beneath her ear. Morning brought clearing skies and a new understanding between them. Neither spoke of the intimacy they had shared, but something had fundamentally changed. Their eyes met more frequently. Their hands found excuses to touch small gestures laden with meaning. They set out early, eager to reach Bethany's homestead by nightfall. The rain had swollen the creek as Sam had predicted, but they found a crossing upstream where the water ran shallower. By late afternoon, familiar landmarks told Bethany they were nearing her property. A strange tension built within her as they crested the final hill overlooking her small valley. When her cabin came into view, she gasped in dismay. The door hung open, swinging in the breeze. Even from a distance, she could see that someone had ransacked the place, furniture overturned, her few possessions scattered across the yard. "Stay here," Sam ordered, drawing his pistol as he rode ahead to investigate. Bethany ignored him, snapping the reins to urge the wagon forward. This was her home, her life, and she wouldn't hide while others assessed the damage. The interior of the cabin was worse than the exterior suggested. Everything had been torn apart, the mattress slashed, floorboards pried up, walls punched through in places. Whoever had done this wasn't just looking for something. They wanted to destroy. "Michael," Bethany said grimly, surveying the destruction. "Or Wilkes. They were looking for gold. Or maybe the deed." Sam nodded, holstering his weapon after ensuring no one remained on the property. "They were thorough. Did they find anything of value?" No, Bethany replied, relieved to see that the small box containing her mother's locket and her few pieces of jewelry remained hidden behind the loose brick in the fireplace. The deed is still with me, and there's no gold to find. They spent the remaining daylight hours restoring order to the cabin, righting furniture, sweeping up broken dishes, boarding the broken window. As night fell, Bethany stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains just as she'd described to Sam. "It really is beautiful," Sam remarked, coming to stand beside her. "Yes," Bethany agreed softly. "Even after everything, it still feels like home." Inside, they shared a simple meal by lamplight, discussing plans for securing the property. Sam believed that once Michael and Wilkes realized the deed remained with Bethany and no gold had been found, they might escalate their efforts. "I can't stay indefinitely," Sam admitted reluctantly. "I have duties, cases pending, but I won't leave you unprotected." "I never expected you to abandon your responsibilities," Bethany assured him, though the thought of his departure sent a pang through her heart. "You've already done more than enough." "Have I?" Sam asked, his eyes searching hers across the table. Before Bethany could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Sam immediately extinguished the lamp, drawing his weapon as he moved to the window. "5 riders," he reported quietly. "Coming fast." Bethany's heart pounded as she retrieved her rifle from beside the door. "Wilkes?" "Most likely," Sam confirmed grimly. "They're not trying to be subtle." "What do we do?" Bethany asked, fear mingling with determination in her voice. "We defend what's yours," Sam replied, positioning himself at one window while directing Bethany to cover the back door. "But be careful, don't expose yourself unnecessarily." The riders surrounded the cabin, their forms dark silhouettes against the night sky. A familiar voice called out from the darkness. "Bethany, come out and talk, or we burn you out." "Michael," Bethany murmured, recognizing her brother-in-law's voice. "He's made his choice." "Mrs. Blackburn is under my protection," Sam shouted in response. "As a U.S. Marshal, I'm ordering you all to drop your weapons and identify yourselves." Laughter greeted his command, followed by the crack of a rifle shot. The bullet splintered the window frame inches from Sam's head. "Your badge means nothing out here, lawman," Michael called back. "This is between family." "He's trying to provoke us," Sam whispered to Bethany. "They want us to waste ammunition, expose our positions." Bethany nodded, her grip steady on her rifle. Years of hunting with her father back east had made her a decent shot, though she'd never fired at a human being. Another shot rang out, followed quickly by a third. Both struck the cabin walls harmlessly. "Last chance, Bethany," Michael shouted. "Sign over the land and you walk away alive, both of you." "Why do you want it so badly?" Bethany called back, genuinely curious. "Is it really just because of some prospector's tale about gold?" A pause followed her question. "That land should have been mine from the start," Michael finally replied, bitterness evident in his voice. "Thomas always got everything the family approval. The pretty wife, the fresh start out west. But he squandered it all, just like he squandered you." "So this is about jealousy?" Bethany asked incredulously. "You killed your own brother over envy?" "I killed him because he was going to sell the land to pay his debts," Michael shot back, confirming her suspicions at last. "Land that should have been mine. He didn't deserve it, and neither do you." Sam exchanged a meaningful glance with Bethany. Michael's confession, shouted in anger, could be used against him if they survived this standoff. "You're surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned," Wilkes's voice joined the conversation. "Be reasonable, Mrs. Blackburn. Sign the deed, and this ends peacefully." "I have a counteroffer," Sam called out. "Michael Blackburn is wanted for murder. The rest of you are now accessories. Surrender your weapons, and I'll speak to the judge about leniency." The response was another volley of shots, one shattering the remaining glass in the window. Sam ducked low, pulling Bethany down with him, as bullets splintered wood and thudded into the cabin walls. "They're going to rush the cabin," Sam predicted as the gunfire paused. "When they do, aim for their legs if you can. I don't want you carrying the weight of a killing if it can be avoided." Bethany nodded, though privately she wasn't sure she could be so merciful if faced with the man who had murdered her husband not out of love for Thomas, but for justice itself. The attack came moments later, 3 men charging the front door while 2 circled to the back. Sam met the frontal assault with precision, his first shot catching one attacker in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. His second found another man's leg, dropping him with a howl of pain. At the back door, Bethany faced her own test as the door splintered under the force of a boot. She fired once, the bullet grazing the first man's side enough to make him stumble backward. The second, recognizing the danger, dove through the window instead, rolling across the floor before Bethany could adjust her aim. She found herself face to face with Jasper Wilkes, his revolver trained on her as he rose to his feet. "Drop it, Mrs. Blackburn," he ordered, a cruel smile playing across his face. Bethany's finger remained on the trigger, her rifle steady despite her racing heart. "You first, Mr. Wilkes." A standoff ensued, broken only when Sam's voice called from the front room. "Bethany?" "I have company," she replied evenly, never taking her eyes off Wilkes. "As do I," Sam answered. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway behind Wilkes, his pistol pressed to the back of the man's head. "Drop the gun, Wilkes, or die where you stand." Wilkes hesitated, calculating his odds. "Where's Michael?" "Your friend made the mistake of trying to be a hero," Sam replied coldly. "He's currently bleeding on the porch, contemplating his poor life choices." With a curse, Wilkes lowered his weapon, letting it clatter to the floor. Bethany immediately retrieved it, her hands surprisingly steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Check the others," Sam instructed as he bound Wilkes's hands with a leather strap. "Make sure they're secured, but tend to any serious wounds." The aftermath of the gunfight was chaotic, but less dire than it might have been. Two of the attackers were wounded, but not critically, one with a shot to the shoulder, another with a bullet lodged in his thigh. A third had been knocked unconscious when Sam slammed him into the doorframe. Michael had indeed been shot, the bullet grazing his side deeply enough to bleed profusely, but not to endanger his life. As Bethany helped Sam bind the prisoners, Michael glared at her with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "You think a backwater judge will believe a widow over a Blackburn? Our family has connections." "Your family disowned you years ago," Bethany reminded him calmly. "And your confession to murdering Thomas was heard by both a U.S. Marshal and myself. I'd say it's very much over, Michael." Dawn found them still at the cabin, the prisoners secured, and their wounds treated as best as possible. Sam had sent one of the less injured men to Silver Creek with a message for Sheriff Miller, requesting assistance in transporting the prisoners. "It will be hours before help arrives," Sam told Bethany as they sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. "You should rest. I'll keep watch." Bethany shook her head, too keyed up for sleep. "I keep thinking about what Michael said about Thomas planning to sell the land. I wonder if it was true." "Would it change anything if it was?" Sam asked gently. "No," Bethany decided after a moment's consideration. "This is my home now, regardless of what Thomas intended. I earned it." Sam's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Yes, you did." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Bethany found herself leaning closer, drawn to the strength and gentleness that defined this man who had changed her life in mere days. "Sam," she began hesitantly, "when this is over?" The distant sound of horses interrupted her. Sam stood, shielding his eyes against the rising sun. "Looks like Sheriff Miller made good time," he remarked, spotting the approaching riders. At least 3 men with him. The arrival of the sheriff and his deputies brought a flurry of activity. The prisoners were loaded onto horses, their injuries re-examined by the town doctor who had accompanied the party. Statements were taken, evidence recorded, and preparations made for the journey back to Silver Creek, where a judge would determine the men's fates. Throughout it all, Bethany noticed Sam growing increasingly quiet, his expression pensive as he conferred with Sheriff Miller. When the lawmen were ready to depart with their prisoners, Sam approached Bethany where she stood by the cabin door. "Sheriff Miller received a telegram for me," he explained, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm needed in Denver immediately. A case I've been building for months is coming to trial, and my testimony is essential." "Oh," Bethany said, unable to hide her disappointment. "When will you leave?" "Now," Sam replied regretfully. "I'll escort the prisoners to Silver Creek, then catch the eastbound train." The news hit Bethany harder than she'd expected. In less than a week, Sam Kincaid had become central to her world, a protector, a friend, perhaps something more. And now he was leaving. "I understand," she said, straightening her shoulders. "You have responsibilities. I won't keep you from them." Sam stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Bethany, this isn't how I wanted things to end between us. I need you to know—" "Marshal Kincaid," Sheriff Miller interrupted, approaching with an apologetic expression. "We need to move out if you're going to make that train." Sam nodded, his jaw tight with frustration. Turning back to Bethany, he reached for her hand, pressing something into her palm. "I'll be back," he promised quietly. "When the trial is over, wait for me." Before Bethany could respond, he was gone, mounting his horse and riding away with the sheriff's party. Opening her hand, she found his deputy marshal's badge, the silver star catching the morning light. The days following Sam's departure were filled with work, repairing the cabin, tending to her small garden, mending fences both literal and metaphorical. Word of the gunfight and Michael's arrest spread quickly through the territory. To Bethany's surprise, her nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, who had always kept their distance, arrived one morning with their sons to help rebuild her damaged barn. "Heard what happened," Mr. Henderson said gruffly. "Not right what those men tried to do. Thought you could use some help." Their kindness was the first of many small gestures from the community. Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house sent over a quilt to replace the one destroyed in the raid. Mr. Abernathy extended credit at the general store. Even Loretta Wilson, the banker's wife who had been so judgmental in town, sent a basket of preserves with a note of apology. It seemed that in standing her ground, Bethany had earned a respect that transcended her status as Thomas Blackburn's widow. For the first time, she was seen as Bethany, in her own right, a woman of courage who had defended her home against impossible odds. 2 weeks passed with no word from Sam. Bethany tried not to count the days, focusing instead on improving her property. Using knowledge gained from books and neighbors' advice, she planted a larger garden, repaired the chicken coop, and even managed to trade labor for 2 milk cows. Each night she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Sam's badge in her hand, wondering if he would keep his promise to return. The land was beginning to feel truly hers now, not just a place she inhabited, but a home she was creating. On a warm afternoon in early June, Bethany was weeding her vegetable garden when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap. Shading her eyes against the sun, she watched a rider approaching from the east, tall and straight-backed on a black stallion she recognized immediately. Sam dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his eyes finding Bethany where she stood frozen among the bean plants. For a moment, neither spoke, the space between them charged with unspoken emotions. "You came back," Bethany finally said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "I promised I would," Sam replied, closing the distance between them. He looked tired but whole, his face more tanned than when she'd last seen him. "How was Denver?" she asked, suddenly shy in his presence despite all they'd been through together. "Successful," he reported. "Michael and Wilkes will stand trial for attempted murder, conspiracy, and, in Michael's case, for Thomas's death. The evidence was overwhelming once we knew where to look." "And now?" Bethany asked, the question encompassing far more than his immediate plans. Sam looked around at the flourishing homestead, the repaired barn, the thriving garden, the new fence posts. "You've been busy," he observed with approval. "It turns out I'm good at building things," Bethany said with a small smile. "Who knew?" "I did," Sam replied softly. "From the moment I saw you standing your ground against those men, I knew you were a builder, not just a survivor." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a folded paper which he handed to Bethany. "I resigned my commission," he explained as she unfolded the document, an official letter accepting his resignation from the U.S. Marshal's Service. "Denver made me realize something important." "What's that?" Bethany asked, her heart thundering in her chest. "That badges and responsibilities are meaningful, but not if they keep me from what matters most." Sam took her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I've spent 5 years chasing outlaws across the territories, trying to find meaning in bringing others to justice. But in a week with you, I found something I wasn't even looking for." "And what was that?" Bethany whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Home," Sam answered simply. "Not a place, but a feeling. Being with you, Bethany. It feels like coming home after a lifetime of wandering." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes as she squeezed his hands. "They say I'm damaged," she whispered, echoing the words she'd spoken that night in the line shack. Sam's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then let me be damaged too with you," he replied, pulling her gently into his arms. The most beautiful things are often made from broken pieces put back together. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning, the closing of a chapter of solitude and the opening of a shared story. When they finally parted, Bethany looked up at him with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Sam replied. "I've bought land adjoining yours to the west. Good grazing land, with access to the same creek. I thought we might build something together, if you're amenable." "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Kincaid?" Bethany asked, her eyes twinkling despite her attempt at seriousness. "I'm proposing everything, Mrs. Blackburn," Sam answered, his voice husky with emotion. "A partnership, a marriage, a life. I want to wake up beside you every morning and watch the sunset with you every evening. I want to help you build a legacy on this land, one that's ours together." Bethany's heart felt too full for words as she stood on tiptoe to kiss him again, pouring all her answer into the gesture. When they parted, both breathless, she finally found her voice. "Yes," she said simply, "to everything." 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day with the mountains ablaze in red and gold, Bethany Blackburn became Bethany Kincaid in a small ceremony beside the creek that divided their adjoining properties. The entire town of Silver Creek turned out for the occasion, even Loretta Wilson, who had become an unlikely friend after learning the full story of Bethany's struggles. As the sun set on their wedding day, Sam and Bethany stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, his arm around her waist as they surveyed the land that was now truly theirs. The barn housed horses and cattle. The garden had been expanded to feed them through winter, and plans for a larger house were already underway. "Happy?" Sam asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible," Bethany replied honestly. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine a future beyond survival. Now, I can't imagine a future without you in it." "You know," Sam mused, "when I first heard those men call you damaged goods in town, I wanted to teach them some manners. But then I realized something." "What's that?" Bethany asked, turning in his arms to face him. "That the most valuable things often come with history's battle scars that prove their worth. Gold that's been through fire. Land that's weathered storms, people who've faced hardship and emerged stronger." His eyes shone with love as he cupped her face. "You're not damaged, Bethany. You're tempered, like the finest steel." "As are you," she replied softly, running her fingers along the scar on his jaw. "Perhaps that's why we fit together so well." As darkness fell around them, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought her here from the frightened widow, defending her land alone, to a woman who had found not just security, but joy. The path had been marked by loss and struggle, but it had led to something precious beyond measure. Sam's arms tightened around her as if reading her thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" "That sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations," Bethany answered, leaning into his embrace, "and that I wouldn't change a single step that led me to you." As they stood together on the threshold of their shared future, the land stretching before them full of promise, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a home, but a belonging that transcended place, a connection that had healed wounds she'd thought would never mend. They were no longer two damaged souls making their way alone through a harsh world. They were partners, stronger together than apart, building something lasting on ground that had been sanctified by their shared struggle and mutual love, a love born in the wild heart of the West, tempered by adversity, and destined to endure. The end.